what a blessing it is for us to be together this morning to worship the one true God. Our whole theme this year, so far, we're just a month into it, has been the God who was, who is, and is to come. And while our sermons are focusing on the one true God, I think it's important for us to pause and think about all the other gods that are there. Because just as long as man has worshiped the one true God, man has also created for themselves false gods. And I think it's worthy of our time to consider because several of those gods are mentioned in the Scriptures. And so this morning, we're going to talk about the gods who weren't, who aren't, or never will be. And we're going to look at a text specifically from Exodus chapter 32. But before we get there, let's just pause for a moment and talk about some of those gods that are littered all throughout the Bible and specifically in the Old Testament. Let's start off with this god we call Baal. Now, in the Hebrew, they may pronounce it Baal. That's debatable maybe, but the idea is that it's Baal. That's what I say as an Arkansan with a southern accent. I call him Baal. I'm not Hebrew by no means. But Baal is interesting. We find this false god all throughout the Scripture, and he goes by other names from Baal Peor and Baal Berith, Baal Zebub. You probably are familiar with that Beelzebub that's mentioned in the New Testament. The meaning of the word Baal is Lord. He has dominion over fertility. He's considered to be the sun or storm or weather god, if you will. He is the supreme god of the people of Canaan and of Phoenicia. And he's mentioned all throughout the Scriptures, but one particular passage that I want to point you to this morning, where there were 450 prophets of Baal gathered together against one man. Let's go over to 1 Kings chapter 18 and look at this passage together. Starting in verse 20, it says this: So Ahab sent a message among all the sons of Israel and brought the prophets together at Mount Carmel. Elijah came near to all the people and said, How long will you hesitate between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him. He's calling them out right here. Make a choice, whether you will follow God or whether you will follow Baal. The people did not answer him a word. They didn't say anything. Then Elijah said to the people, I'm alone, one left prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Now let us give them 2 oxen. So he says, let's get 2 oxen out here. And let's sacrifice these oxen. One on an altar dedicated to Baal. Let's start there. And so that's what they did. They killed this ox. They laid it down. And the people of Baal began to cry out to Baal to come and to burn up this offering, to accept this offering. They cry out and they cry out and they cry out, and nothing happens. Nothing happens. Verse 26, they took the ox which was given to them and they prepared it, and they called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, O Baal, answer us. And the Bible says, there was no voice, and no one answered. And they leaped about the altar. See, if you just dance around the altar, maybe that'll work, which they had made. And it came about noon that Elijah mocked them and said, call out with a loud voice. Maybe your God just can't hear. Call out with a loud voice. For he is a God. Notice that's lowercase g. Either he is occupied, or maybe he's gone aside, or maybe he's on a journey. He's taking a cruise somewhere. Or perhaps he's asleep and he needs to be awakened. Call out with a loud voice. So they cried out with a loud voice, and they cut themselves according to their customs with swords and lances until blood gushed out on them. How horrible. When midday was past, they raved until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice. But there was, my Bible says, no voice, no one answered, no one paid attention. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come near to me." So all the people came near, and he prepared the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Israel shall be your name." So with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. And he stretched a trench, made a trench around the altar large enough to hold 2 measures of seed. Go down here to verse 34. And he said, "Go ahead, take some water, pitchers of water, and pour it on the burnt offering, on the wood. And then do it a second time. Go ahead and do it a third time." And they did it a third time. And so much so that the water followed down all the way and filled the trench that's around the altar. Verse 36. At the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet came near and said, here's his prayer to God, "O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, today let it be known to you, you are God in Israel, and I am your servant, and I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their back, and you have turned their back to you." Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. When all the people saw it, they fell to their faces, and they said, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." This is a showdown. A showdown between the one true God and this false god Baal that doesn't even exist. And God shows His power. So much so that when the fire came down and destroyed everything on the altar, destroyed the sacrifice, licked up the water that was there, even after that, after there's just ashes there, a wind comes by and sweeps those ashes away. That's the one true God in comparison to the false god, the God who doesn't even exist. The Bible goes on to talk about another god, Ashtaroth, or Ishtar, Astarte, or Ashtoreth. This name means star, and this goddess really has the dominion of sensuality, is what they believed. She was the god of the moon, of the Canaanite people, and really was the female counterpart to Baal. Matter of fact, she's coupled in with Baal on numerous occasions. There's 2 passages that I want to show you where she's mentioned, and it's found in Judges chapter 2 to begin with. Judges chapter 2. During the time of the judges, the people of Israel really, really struggled. They struggled with knowing, well, not necessarily knowing, but choosing to do the right thing. Here's what the verses say in Judges 2 and verse 11. "Then the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods from among the gods of the people who were around them, and bowed themselves down to them. Thus they provoked the Lord to anger. So they forsook the Lord and served Baal and Ashtaroth. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and He gave them into the hands of plunderers and plundered them, and He sold them into the hands of their enemies around them, so that they could no longer stand before their enemies. Wherever they went, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil. As the Lord had spoken, and as the Lord had sworn to them, so they were severely distressed. Why were they distressed? They served false gods. The other passage goes back over here to Judges chapter 10, verses 6 through 8. Very similar to the one we've already read, but notice what it says. The sons of Israel did again evil in the sight of the Lord, served the Baals and the Ashtaroth, the gods of Aram, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the sons of Ammon, and the gods of the Philistines. Thus they forsook the Lord and did not serve him. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines and in the hands of the sons of Ammon. They afflicted and crushed the sons of Israel that year. For 18 years they afflicted all the sons of Israel who were beyond the Jordan in Gilead in the land of the Amorites. God's people struggled. They struggled. Another god I want to mention to you is the god Molech. God Molech. Another AKA, I don't know if it's pronounced differently or anything like that, but Molech or Molech, I don't know. But this name means king. And his dominion is the dominion of the underworld. And during their worship to Molech, they would sacrifice their babies by burning them alive. How horrible. There's a biblical reference to this worship of Molech found in Leviticus chapter 20, verses 1 through 5. It says, Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, You shall say to the sons of Israel, Any man from the sons of Israel or from the aliens sojourning in Israel, in other words, guests that are traveling with Israel, who gives any of his offspring to Molech shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I will also set my face against that man and will cut him off from among his people, because he had given some of his offspring to Molech, so as to defile my sanctuary and to profane my holy name. If the people of the land, however, should ever disregard that man when he gives any of his offspring to Molech, so as not to put him to death, then I myself will set my face against that man and against his family, and I will cut off from among their people both him and all those who play the harlot after him, by playing the harlot after Molech. So not only people that worship Molech by sacrificing their children, but anybody that allows or tolerates people that do this very thing shall also be put to death. That's powerful. These are just 3 gods that I wanted to cover this morning. One of the most famous false gods that I think we think of often when we think about the people of Israel worshiping a false god is the golden calf. And you think, in my mind, I think, do these people know better? Do the people of Israel know better than to worship these false gods? Absolutely they do. They absolutely know better. You see, the people of Israel come from Abraham. They come from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the name Jacob is really interesting. God changes his name to Israel, which means wrestling with God. And as much as Jacob literally wrestled with the Lord God, the people of Israel, all the sons and descendants, wrestled with God. They struggled with God. And you know what? I think today even, we struggle. We wrestle with God. Not literally, but we struggle with making God the priority in our lives. And we begin to erect for ourselves or create for ourselves false gods. And we've got to get back on track. Do the people of Israel know better? I know they know better. God told them, as was read for us just a moment ago, when God gives the people of Israel the 10 Commandments, he brings Moses up on the mountain. They've been delivered out of Egypt, out of bondage of the Egyptians, crossed over the Red Sea. They're there at the foot of Mount Sinai, and he calls Moses up on this mountain to give him the law of God. And he gives it to him verbally. And the people of God are gathered around, and they can hear thunder and lightning is going off. And they can hear this voice of God as he's giving it to Moses. And God says, I am the Lord your God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. It's important for us to make a mental note about that because God is saying, give credit to whom credit is due. I am the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Now, tuck that away in your brain and we'll come back to it. He says, you shall have no other gods before me. The first of the 10 commandments is that you should have no other gods before me. And I think that if we could figure that one out, if the people of God could just figure that one out and master that of having no other gods before the one true God, all the other commandments seem to fall in line. Because if God is your God, then you'll do everything that your God says. And you'll follow everything else that he says. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, or any likeness of what is in heaven, above, or on the earth, beneath, or on the water, or under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them. I am the Lord your God, am a jealous God. He's a jealous God. No other gods before me. No other gods before me. Don't make yourself, some versions say, a graven image. Don't make yourself an idol. Don't carve something out of wood or out of stone and say, I'm going to worship it. You don't get to do that. Don't make something that looks like something that's been created. I am the Lord your God. I am a jealous God. And I don't want anything else to come between me and you. You are to worship me and worship and serve me only. Don't worship and serve those false gods. I'm the only one. This word jealous, sometimes we think of it being as a negative thing here. It's not a negative thing when it comes to God's jealousy. God doesn't want, he loves you so much that he doesn't want you to be dedicated to anything else but him. He loves you, and he's jealous of you if you go anywhere else. Well, when the people of Israel, they hear this, in Exodus 20, they hear this command. Moses comes down and he tells them everything that God has said. He's already given all the 10 commandments in Exodus 20. Then Moses comes down the mountain and he's verbally giving it to the people of Israel. He goes on to talk about all the different laws that God is expecting of the people of Israel. And here's what the people of Israel say. Verse 3 and verse 7 of Exodus chapter 24 says this. Then Moses came and recounted to the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances. See, it's a recounting. They've already heard it. Now Moses is reiterating. He's telling them all again, all the ordinances. And the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has spoken, we will do. We'll do it. Then he took the book of the covenant and he read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient. We're committing to it. Of course, that's the struggle. All the words, they say, we'll do. All the things that God has said, we'll be obedient to. But the struggle is that just 40 days later, we find them going against what they said. They knew better. They knew better. So Moses, after he recounts everything to them, God tells him and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu to go up on the mountain and bring 70 of the people of Israel with him, 70 elders of the people of Israel. Come a little bit closer. And so they did. And then he tells Moses, I want you to come a little bit even more close. And I'm going to write out these laws that I've given to you verbally in stone, literally in stone. Write them out. And they'll be on tablets for you to have. And then 40 days later, this happens. Mistake number 1 of the people of Israel. Go over with me to Exodus chapter 32. Exodus chapter 32. we find that the people of Israel, their first mistake is they begin to exchange the truth for a lie. They exchange the truth for the lie, starting in verses 1 through 4. It says, "Now when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled about Aaron and said to him, 'Come, make us a god who will go before us. For as this Moses, the man who has brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him.'" Oh, this is full of mistakes. They want a God who will come before them. You see what the problem is? It's a lie. It's a lie. We don't know where Moses is. He's missing in action. He's been up on this mountain and he's been there a long time and we don't know where he's at. And they said to Aaron, "We need a God who will go before us." Where's this Moses? Where's this man who brought us out of the land of Egypt? Now wait a minute. Remember? What did God say? "I brought you out of the land of Egypt." The people are already believing a lie, thinking that Moses is their leader. And he is in a sense, but God is the one that did this through Moses. And he says it. He says, "I'm the one that brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." And now these people are beginning to think, Moses, the man who has brought us out of Egypt, where is he? Make a God for us. Make a God for us. We don't know what's happened to this man Moses. And so, that's what they do. That's what they do. Keep reading with me. Verse 2, Aaron said to them, "Take the gold, the earrings, from your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." These are gold earrings that they had acquired as they were leaving Egypt. Take all those things. The people tore off the gold and the rings that were in their ears, and they brought them to Aaron. And he took them from their hand, and he fashioned it with a graving tool, and made it into a molten calf. And they said, "This," and he said, "This is your God." Oh, what a lie. "Your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." This golden calf brought you out of the land of Egypt? No way. No way. It's a lie. Their first mistake is they begin to take the truth and substitute it with this lie. And they exchanged God for this golden calf. That's their mistake. Exchanging this truth for a lie. You think, well, how could they fall for a lie? How could they do this? They begin to lose sight. Moses was out of sight and out of mind. There they are, and they don't know what's happened, and they begin to exchange things for God instead. Sometimes we do that too. Sometimes we're guilty of that. If we stay too far away from the Word of God, if we stay too far away from putting our eyes on the words, if we stay too far away from looking at each other in the eye and staying away from the church, before too long, we're going to substitute things in place of God. What a problem. They fell for a lie because they substituted. Out of sight, out of mind. Where's this Moses? And really, where is God? They begin to ask that question. That's their mistake. Exchanging truth for a lie. Mistake number 2. They begin to compromise their standards. Keep reading with me. Verse 4, we've already looked at this, but let's look at it again for another point here. It says, he took from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made it into a molten calf. And he said, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Now when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." So the next day they rose early, and they offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and to drink and rose up early to play. Isn't it interesting? They begin to compromise their standards. Notice what happens here. Aaron takes from their hand, a human hand, and he fashioned it, he made it with a graving tool, something that God has provided. And he made it into a molten calf. You remember last week when I was talking about creation and how that everything that we have around us is God's creation. And God spoke those things into existence. But anything that we make, we don't create. You make a cake. You don't create a cake. You make things. We build and make houses. We don't create things. We don't speak things into existence. AREN here begins to take things that man has made and begins to make and fashion up this golden calf. And then he built an altar before this golden calf. And then he begins to do this. He says, you know what? It's okay if we make this golden calf, but we'll also have another day. Maybe tomorrow we'll worship the Lord. And too many times the people of God have said, tomorrow I will do this for the Lord. Today it's all about this. Tomorrow I'll do this. And so they begin to compromise and saying, we can do both. We'll have this golden calf, and then tomorrow we'll have a feast for the Lord. That's a problem. We can't compromise. And so what do? The people sat down, they ate, they drank, and they played. They played. It's a problem. They begin to compromise their standards. AREN wouldn't take a stand for God. He wouldn't take a stand. AREN could have easily said, you know what? I'm not going to have any part of this. This is wrong. Listen, AREN was just there listening to God. He was just there on the foot of this mountain and then a little bit even closer to God. Matter of fact, when Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and all the 70 elders go up a little bit into the mountain, the Bible says that they saw God. They even saw this glass sapphire lake in front of the throne of God. They saw him. And it says they ate and they drank with God. Aaron was just there in the presence of God. And now he says, you know what, we can do both. We can serve this false God, and then tomorrow we'll serve God, the one true God. And it's a compromising a standard. It's already been set. He accommodated the wishes of the people. Just went along with it. And it's wrong. Mixing the Yahweh worship, the Lord God worship, with idol worship. It's a mistake. And you know what? Sometimes we're guilty of the same thing. Mistake number 3. Turning aside from the commandments of God. Keep reading with me, verses 7 through 8. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, go down at once for your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt. They've corrupted themselves. They have quickly turned aside from the way which I commanded them. And they made for themselves a molten calf, and have worshipped it, and sacrificed it, and said, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. God's telling Moses everything that's going on at the foot of this mountain. And he says they've broken the commandments of God. They've left it. And they've got to do something different. They've quickly turned aside from the way that I've commanded. So quick. Now think about it. How quickly is it? Well, they just received all the 10 commandments, but the first one being, no other gods before me. And while Moses is going up and receiving, my microphone just fell off. Hold on just a second. Whoop. I'll put it in my back pocket. While they have already received the 10 commandments verbally, now they are receiving the 10 commandments written in stone. And while they're doing that, while these 10 commandments are being written, they're disobeying the first commandment. That's how quickly they turned. So quick. They knew it. They knew better. And then they turned aside, away from the ways of God. So their mistake is they didn't listen to the commandments of God. They departed from what God told them to do. And they avoided a direct command and really just did what they wanted instead. That's worshiping a false god. Mistake number 4 is that they were being detrimentally hard-headed. Detrimentally hard-headed. Now that's pretty bad. Most of us are probably hard-headed in some way or another, right? We like our way and we don't want to really move away from that one way. But this is so hard-headed that it became dangerous for them. Detrimentally hard-headed. Look at verses 9 through 10 with me. The Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people. Behold, they are an obstinate people. Now then, let me alone, that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them and make of you a great nation. They are an obstinate people. They're so stubborn, so set in their ways and doing their ways only, that God's anger burned against them. So much so that he says, you know what, just leave me alone. I'm going to destroy this people, and I will build a new nation from you, Moses. I'll destroy them, and I'll make of you a new nation. Well, Moses, he doesn't want that to happen. He actually pleads with God. God, listen, you brought these people out of Egypt. What is everybody else going to say if you just brought them out to Egypt and then you just kill them? What are we going to do about that? That's not going to work. Be patient with them. Well, God listens to Moses right there. God listens to him, and he doesn't destroy them. But their mistake is that they were detrimentally hard-headed, so set in their ways, they were blind to the truth, even if that truth will save them. We're guilty of that as well at times, because sometimes we too are so stubborn that we would be destroyed. That's what the people of Israel faced. That's what they faced. But that's not the only mistake. Number 5, and the final mistake of the people of Israel, well, not the final one, they've made multiple mistakes even after that, but the one in this context. They were dangerously losing control of themselves. Dangerously losing control of themselves. Verse 25 through 26 says, Now when Moses saw that the people were out of control, for Aaron had let them get out of control and be a derision among their enemies. When Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, Whoever is for the Lord, come to me. And the sons of Levi gathered together to him. This is a beautiful picture right here. I appreciate this one in two different ways. First of all, these people were getting so out of control that they had to be reined back in. And that's what it takes sometimes. That's the way it is in discipline. That sometimes people can get so out of control that you've got to rein them back in and punish them to gain control back over this situation. And so Moses calls them all together and says, if you're with me, come and be a part of me. Because otherwise, we're going to become a mockery to our enemies. Our enemies will look out among us and they'll say, oh, sure, these people, their God brought them all out, and they think that they're all better than us. And they begin to look and mock us. And as soon as these people begin to be mocked, their enemies begin to think, well, maybe we can go in and destroy them in their weak moments. They're out of control, and it became dangerous. Dangerous for them to be that out of control. Being that out of control means that you're falsely thinking that your newfound freedom would allow them to do whatever they wanted. See, the people of Israel were brought out of slavery. They were brought out of this horrible situation, being oppressed. And then they're brought out and they think, okay, now we become our own nation. Now we're our own people. We've got this great freedom, and that's a dangerous thing. It's a dangerous thing. Because these people, they thought, we left such horrible oppression, and now we're out on our own. We can do whatever we want. And people need to be careful with that. Let's not allow our children to be so much in a bubble that they're not exposed to what's around them, but help them to be able to see and coach them through the dangers that are out there. The people of Israel got out on their newfound freedom. They thought, we can do whatever we want. And they began to do that. They got out of control, and it became dangerous for them. And therefore their enemies begin to mock them. Now you think, well, what's the application for us? What's North Heights? What's our application? We don't follow false gods. We're not erecting altars to Baal. We're not, erecting temples to Ashtaroth or sacrificing our children to Molech. We're not doing those things. We're not taking our gold and our silver and all of our metals and forming the golden calf. That's not us. We're not doing that. But do we allow money and possessions and sports and free time and leisure and hobbies and entertainment and sex and beauty and power and status and education and political propensities and science and substances and comfort and family and religion or even ourselves to become our gods? Some of those things, there's nothing wrong with those things. We look at those things, and those are some of them are necessities. Some of those are even sanctioned by God. But when we allow those things that are on this list to become more important than anything else, and in relation to our God, those things become our God. God says in the Ten Commandments, "You shall not have any other gods besides me." And a lot of times we think, well, that means that I need to have a list of prioritization. And I'm going to put God at the top of the list, and then I can put all these other things below that list. But that's not what that word means. Have no other gods besides me. What he says is that you should have no other gods before me. That if I am your God, there's nothing else that's more important in your life than me. The rest of your list that you prioritize makes no difference. Only me. And if we can get that in our brains, if we can begin to live that way, then we'll be pleasing to God. You start thinking, well, this money, these sports, these free time, these are good things. But if they become more important than God, period, the God who is, the God who was, and the God who is to come, everything else falls apart. You shall have no other gods before me. God is the only one. Otherwise, these things are in the way. And we've got to purge them out of our lives. This is the gods who weren't, who aren't, and who never will be. Get your life right. Get your priorities in straight. Make sure that God is it for you, and that there's nothing else on the face of the planet in your spiritual life that's more important than God. All of us have an opportunity right now to examine our lives and think about our commitment to the one true God. If you're ready to obey the gospel and make a commitment to Him by putting Jesus, His Son, on in baptism, God is the only God for you. If you've strayed away and fallen away, and other things have become more important to you, and you have other gods in your life, now's the great time for you to come back and put no other gods before God. If you need to respond, come together we stand, and as we